So, hello, Adam. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
We enjoyed a night out at the pub the other day. That was very enjoyable. And I think part of that conversation that came up was why does hospitality matter so much to us? Why does it dominate the news?
Well, I think that there is some hard facts around that, and some possibly softer ones that are equally important. The first and most obvious is that it's an enormous employer. There are something like 3 million people employed in the hospitality sector, which dwarfs things like car construction and possibly even construction itself. Um, and of course, there's a huge amount of payroll taxes attached to that employment, and there's a huge amount of on cost if that employment ceases to be there in terms of the costs of unemployment support and so forth. So it's just a really big part of the economy. That said, it's not all about money. There is no question that we as a species are a gregarious bunch, and most of us love to congregate in places where there are lots of other of our own species, and preferably with a pint or two, and feel that buzz that hospitality can afford us. And the reality is that for many people, not being able to do so is I wouldn't say it's a significant contributor to mental problems, but certainly I think there's no question that going out makes us feel good. We all look forward to it, and when it's not available to us, there's just a little brick taken out of the well-being wall. So I think it's it's an important part of most people's everyday life experience.
Yeah, I think we've seen on the news over the last year, there's been any number of people involved in the hospitality industry very concerned about the financing of their businesses. Obviously, the the the, the most obvious one being the lack of trade due to being shut down. But what are the particular issues around funding the hospitality industry anyway?
Like any industry, banks, and let's start with the bank kind of funding arrangements. Like any industries, banks tend to have an exposure quota where they will look at a sector and say we'll only be prepared to be exposed this much to this sector. It's all about them balancing their risk, and of course, through the CBILS and bounce back loan schemes, many of them will have very significant exposure to the hospitality sector by virtue of those schemes. And whilst I appreciate that in large part those are backed by the government, so the exposure is reduced, it is still exposure. And you've got to argue that a problematic hospitality sector at the very least would give the banks the responsibility of trying to manage and collect non-performing loans from the sector. So it's just problem after problem. Equally, there is the problem of recent track record, because banks will traditionally want to see management accounts and so forth. But even the non-bank lenders, and if we look at merchant cash advances, for instance, which the hospitality sector has made big use of over the last 5 or 6 years, of course, the way they calculate your available facility is based on recent credit card machine takings, which are going to be zero over
Mm.
or close to zero, certainly over the last 12 months, maybe 3 months of available trading figures, and then under really significant restrictions. So I don't know how the MCA providers are going to manage that, but there is no question that there are structural problems with their business as usual type approach to it, which I don't think are going to be terribly easily resolved. And I think, finally, in terms of the access to finance piece, if you're a lender, you're going to be looking at the lending and the business landscape and thinking to yourself, which sector is most vulnerable to an upsurge in COVID cases, and clearly the two that sit at the very, very top of the list are travel and hospitality. So your exposure to a repeat spike in pandemic numbers is going to be very real and very contingent on people A, getting jabs, but also B, behaving responsibly, which, based on the pictures from Monday's grand reopening, are not necessarily happening at this point. So there's a really nasty witch's brew there that is going to take some sorting out.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is going to play out over the next sort of 6 months or so. Really, we're not going to see this immediately. What effects what long-term effects do you think this is going to have on the hospitality industry? Is there any? Do you think there's any sort of overriding lessons out of this, or is it just that this is a terrible event that's happened and there will be some pain at the end of it?
Well, I think, the hospitality will be subject to the same K-shaped recovery as everybody else, and there will be a significant number of businesses that, for various reasons, simply won't make it, even though they've now been allowed to reopen. Reopening on the terms permitted by the government currently isn't really economically viable for a lot of them. So there's your problem there. Having said which, one thing that you cannot deny is that the demand is huge.
Yeah.
I was out with some friends yesterday in Bristol, down at Jail Ferry Steps, which is where a collection of very pleasant, rather fashionable restaurants are operating, and every single one was just wall to wall, book solid.
Yeah.
So we know that the demand's there, and if they are able to survive, those that do survive and are allowed to return to normal trading will probably find a rather nice situation where a lot of the competition has unfortunately gone south. So they're going to be able to enjoy significant customer demand for a considerable period of time, I would have thought. So it's not all gloom and doom, but they have to get to the end of the tunnel first.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen. Thank you for that. Let's end on that happy note, I think, and we'll see what the months ahead of us bring. Thanks a lot for your time.
You're welcome. Goodbye.